Hey guys, welcome back. My name is Cade Bonsall. Once again, I'm joined by my friend Andrew Duvall, and this is going to be our review for The Conjuring from 2013. So, Andrew, The Conjuring, what do you say? Is this one of your favorite horror films of all time?
Hmm, I really like it. I don't know if I would consider it a favorite for reasons that we're going to talk about later on, but it is definitely a very well-made horror movie.
Oh, no doubt about that. And well, I think that relates to one of my pros about the movie. So, one of the reasons it's so well made is because, well, first off, it's a James Wan film, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but James Wan, he is definitely one of my favorite horror directors, along with Wes Craven and also Jordan Peele. There's something about James Wan. He just really knows how to make a horror film great. And you can see that with some of his other films, the Insidious movies, the first two specifically, also the Saw movie, and also I think Malignant and The Conjuring 2. But I do think that The Conjuring might be his best movie overall. I do like all the other films he's made, but yeah, of them all, I think this might actually be the best one that he's ever made.
Yeah, I'll agree with that because I liked the first Insidious. I don't think I ever actually saw the second one now that I think about it. Malignant was pretty good. Saw, I mean, it's a well-made movie, but I'm not a huge fan of the torture porn, ultra gory movies. I just never have been. It's never been my cup of tea. Conjuring 2 is pretty good, though I don't think it was as good as the first one. So yeah, I would agree. This is probably his best horror movie. I mean, we could talk about his action movies till the cows come home, but
Right. Yeah. But yeah, there's James Wan, he just really knows how to make a horror film. And again, he's made other movies. He made Aquaman, he also made Furious 7. And so I think, he has made different kinds of films, but I think that horror is definitely the genre that he probably feels the most comfortable with, and that's probably why he does so well with making them. So yeah, that's why I think The Conjuring is definitely his best film. And that's another thing about James Wan. He's just a guy that knows how to build suspense and therefore keep audiences invested in his films.
exactly, yeah, because he's very good with building tension and he's very good at holding tension too. And he's really good at doing that with lighting, especially.
Yes.
And he's also good at getting very scared performances out of his actors as well.
Yes, and that actually goes into that relates to one of my other pros about the movie. So, one of the best things that I think this movie has to offer would have to be the performances. I think the performances in this movie are great, especially I think Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. Their performances in each Conjuring film that they've made, both the first one and the second one, and the third movie, and also the Annabelle film, just something about their chemistry always feels so great. And they're such likable actors and protagonists, Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they just really bring a lot of life to the Conjuring films in general. In movies that are supposed to be very haunting and scary, they just bring a lot of, I guess, sort of a happiness and balance to the films in general. And I just really attribute a lot of that to their acting.
Yeah, and another aspect of that is that they don't always immediately jump to it's the supernatural with their thought process and with their performance. Like I believe it is the second one where they're investigating something and it turns out it's just something knocking around in the attic, like in the ventilation. Or is it
Yeah,
the first?
no, I think it's this one actually.
Is it this one? Again, it's been a while since I've seen Conjuring 2, so I honestly kind of can't remember, and I have never rewatched the third one because I'm not a huge fan of the third one.
That's fine.
But no, the acting is very, very good across the board. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, again, very, very good as the Warrens. And the fact that they were able to keep being very good throughout this kind of spider web of a franchise, they bring some legitimacy to it as well. You know, they're both very talented actors. And acting in a horror movie is something that can make or break it,
Yes.
as we've seen in slashers in particular. I noticed tend to have the problem of very bad acting. Haunted house stuff like this, you really need that good acting to kind of sell it, and this movie does it very well. Not only with the Warrens, but also with the family they're investigating in the farmhouse, which I'm sure is going to be our next topic of conversation.
Yes, absolutely. But before we really get into that, in terms of the acting, as much as I love Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, I really think the real standout performance in this movie was probably Lily Taylor as Carolyn Perrin. Because honestly, I think that the reason I love her performance so much is because throughout the first half, she plays the protective mother who wants to keep her family safe very well. But in the second half, when she's possessed and when she becomes evil while being possessed, her performance throughout the movie just remains so great. And I really think that she kind of steals the show in that way, to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree. And the fact that it's never over the top either when she's possessed. Like it's genuinely that kind of perfect straddling the line of the physical acting, but also not being over the top to the point where it's still scary. That's actually one of the things I love about the first Evil Dead movie is when Ash's friends start getting possessed and turn to the Deadites. It's still that genuinely scary kind of physical acting. It's not over the top physical acting.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, her performance is great. Well, everyone gives a good performance in this movie, honestly. I don't think that there's a single bad performance at all. But yeah, another pro about this movie would have to be the story of the film. I think the story for this movie is really good. And because the reason I say that is to me, it's not just another simple haunted house story.
No, it's not. It's not just, oh, we bought this scary looking house and there's a ghost in it, which is a problem a lot of other haunting movies have, not just haunted house movies, but also, oh, we're playing with a Ouija board or something, and we awaken a dark spirit and that's it. This one, they actually dive into the history of the house and what created the dark spirit. And, they add some background to it, which is always nice, at least for me.
Yeah, yeah, it's great for me too. And another thing that I really like about this movie is despite the fact that Ed and Lorraine Warren are kind of the heroes of the story, and the Perrin family are the people who they're trying to help. I like how this is a movie that really focuses on two different families in the way, because while we have the Perrin family, we also have the Warrens, and there's also their daughter Judy, and we spend, I think, not a huge amount of time on that side, but I think a good amount, and you really see the balance of both families and how what they both go through during this investigation and this haunting. And I think it creates a very unique dynamic in that way.
Indeed. You got the Warrens who believe in the paranormal, but don't all. It's not always the answer. You got Carolyn, who seems to be a bit more leaning towards it being the supernatural. And then you got her husband, who is very much like, oh, you're crazy. Something, there's nothing supernatural about any of this.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And another thing that I think is great about the story is if you look back at it and really analyze it, this movie includes so many horror elements in one film. Because look back, we have sequences of paranormal activity, we have themes of witchcraft, we have demons, we have possession. We have so many layers to the story and so many horror elements in one film. And somehow it doesn't feel like overstuffed or anything. It just feels like each layer just ties so well together to create this one big story in that way.
Yeah, and again, based on the region that it takes place in, and I mean, you and I are both New Englanders. Witchcraft and supernatural is very much tied into the makeup of New England. It has been for a very long time. So
Yeah, and that's what I'll get into next. So another thing that's great about this movie, I think, is just the setting. I think the setting for this movie is fantastic. And as New Englanders, I think that makes it kind of a little bit more like scary to us as audiences in that way. And aside from that, I also really love the main location of this film, the Parent House. I think that location for the movie, because think about it, most of the movie takes place at that house. And I think that it's such a great location because it manages to look both haunting and gorgeous at the same time, if you know what I mean, because it feels so haunting because of what's going on. But at the same time, every time I look back at this movie, I always just think, wow, this house is actually really nice. It's a really beautiful place. And to have all this horrific, stuff going on, just it's just really unique in that way.
yeah, and there's actually one aspect I really like, and I'm not sure if this was intentional or not, is you can tell that this is an older house, but they've clearly, remodeled it, made it a bit more modernized on the inside. But as they start to, kind of pull back the modern layers, they find the older like skeleton of the house, and then things start getting even more and more. The dark forces start coming out more and more. It's like you're cracking, you let the genie out of the bottle, shall we
Yes.
say?
Right. Yeah, that's another great thing about the movie. And aside from the setting, I think one of the best things about this movie would honestly have to be the atmosphere. I think the atmosphere in this movie is just so fantastic because here's why. So, if you look at it, the tone remains so consistent throughout most of the movie from beginning to end. And I think that not with a lot of horror films, but sometimes the tone kind of jumps back and forth from time to time and feels kind of uneven just because of what it's dealing with, what themes it's exploring. But with this movie, it explores so many different elements of horror and the dynamic between these two families and what they go through and their personal struggles. And the tone of the movie just remains so consistent and it flows very well in that sense.
Absolutely. And I think another benefit of that is the fact that, again, it takes place basically all in this one house. It's this very enclosed space. It's very tight. There's not these big wide shots to kind of give the characters or the viewer a chance to breathe. And there's also a lot of like long tracking shots too, which, there's no cutaways to give you that, quick chance to catch your breath either.
Well, that's another thing. This movie is shot so well. The cinematographer, John R. Leonetti, he did such a great job shooting this movie, and that really helped build the atmosphere. And I think another thing that really helps the tone of the movie as well. And another thing that I love about how great the atmosphere of this movie is that it keeps audiences so unsettled. And with that, it's not a movie that has to rely so heavily on jump scares every 5 seconds. I mean, this movie does have its fair share of jump scares, but it's not something that happens every 5 seconds. It just remains so haunting throughout the whole thing. And that's a unique element of this movie.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, the jump scares that we do have, they're not, oh, somebody's walking down the hallway, somebody's going to jump out in front of them. Like my favorite example and my favorite scare in this movie is Carolyn's moving through the house, and it's dark, and she's got, I can't remember if it's a candle or a lighter kind of leading her way. And then there's the clap from next to her.
Yes.
And the fact that shot from, we're looking directly at her face, she's walking towards the camera. That is a setup that we've seen before, but with a payoff that we haven't really seen before.
Right.
And that kind of creativity is what helps elevate the scares. And again, James's directing also really helps that as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's another great thing about the movie. I mean, this movie has so many pros about it, and that's why it's definitely one of my favorite horror films. But yeah, why don't we get into our cons with this movie? Because I think we have a few. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start on this one. This is a bit long of a movie.
An hour and 52 minutes?
Why did I think it was longer than that? I thought it was like 2.5.
No, I think you're thinking about the second Conjuring. That one's a little longer.
Oh, God. Oh, God, freaking amateur hour over here for me. Jeez Louise. But the pacing is a little bit off in places. Like, I feel like it does take a little too long to really get going.
Yeah, I kind of get what you mean, and that is a con that I have with the movie because, I mean, again, the pacing in this movie isn't necessarily bad.
No, it's not bad. It's a little off.
Well, yeah, it is because again, yeah, it does take, I think, the first 30 or 40 minutes for maybe a little bit longer for the Warrens to get involved and for the real like central plot of the film to kind of pick up. But I kind of get why it does that because it's trying to introduce us to both families and really explore them before the main stuff happens. But yeah, the pacing is a little off at times. And I'm not going to lie, when it comes to the quality of the film, I think in terms of the quality, the third act of this movie kind of drops in terms of the quality. It's not that it drops to being bad. It's just, it's not as gripping as the first two acts because when you get to the third act, it kind of just feels a little wonky. It's not a bad climax. Again, it's just that the quality is just not as strong as it was earlier.
Yeah, and I think the absolute climax where Carolyn is fully possessed and everybody's trying to exorcise her. I think they're showing a little too much. I think another one of the strengths of this movie is it doesn't show everything clearly.
Right.
It lets you think about it and try to kind of fill in the gaps, and that really does add to the scares. I think the ending shows a little too much, and I think the CGI is off a little bit. On top of that, and that really doesn't help.
Well, remember, man, they didn't have a huge budget for this movie.
That's true. So that's why it's not a huge take. It's not taking off a huge amount of points. I just think it definitely doesn't help.
No, I get what you mean. Yeah, that's definitely a con with this movie, but I think my only other one is the fact that it's based on a true story. And hear me out when I say that. So every time I watch a movie that is based on a true story, I always go in thinking, just because of how my brain works, I always think, okay, what probably did happen and what probably didn't happen. And this is one of those movies where I don't know if you feel the same way, but you can kind of tell what probably was made up at certain points.
Yeah, and based on a true story will forever be one of those things where it's like you were saying, like, oh, did this part actually happen or is this being embellished?
Right.
And sometimes the embellishment improves the story. Sometimes it really takes away from it.
Yes.
So, and I understand that at least the mainline Conjuring movies, I believe every one of them came out directly out of the Warrens files.
Yes.
I'm not sure about the spin-offs like the Annabelles and the Nun and the Crooked Man movie that apparently we're getting, but apparently not getting at the same time. That's a weird topic for another time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. On the other hand, I don't know if we would have as good of a film if these were completely original stories, because you wouldn't have this, clearly, you wouldn't have all this detail you can actually draw from and actually, turn into like an actual moving picture. So that's kind of a weird one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge issue with the movie. It's just something that it's just a feeling that I always have every time I watch a film that is supposedly based off a true story like this one is. But it doesn't take away from the movie at all. But aside from that, yeah, I still really love this movie despite those cons, obviously with all the pros we just talked about. But yeah, I think if you were to give this a rating, where would you rate this at from a scale of 1 to 10?
Um, Again, I'm not sure if it's one of my all-time favorite horror movies, but it is still a very well-made one, very well shot, very well acted, as we discussed. So, I'm gonna lean to like an 8.5 to an 8.75, because it is a very good movie. It's just it is also a little bit slow in places, and again, like we talked about, the climax is a bit takes out a little bit. And another thing about the climax is I think it's lit a little too brightly either.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I get what you mean. But yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with the how you rate it. I think I would also give it an 8.5 because again, aside from those little issues, I think this movie's fantastic. It is one of my favorite horror films, and yeah, I think that's about it. All right, guys, I think that's the end of our review. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and yeah, we'll see you later. Bye.